occasion flew along a canyon so narrow that the wingtips seemed to brush the rock face. Finally, they lifted across a snow-covered ridge and plunged into space. Beneath them, an enormous valley dropped 10,000 feet, black with depth, purple and gold, great shimmering banks of clouds strung across it in broken strands. Perhaps 7 or 8 miles away on the other side was the last frozen barrier between Balpur and Tibet. The sound of the engine suddenly seemed strangely muted, and Chung sighed through the uncanny quiet. "The most beautiful sight I've ever seen." "The place of silence, that's what they call it," Drummond told him. "Used to take 2 days to get across on foot when caravans were still coming through." The beaver seemed to glide on through the enormous blue vault, drifting through the shadows, and then they burst out into golden sunlight, and the final barrier rose before them. Drummond eased back the stick, and the beaver lifted, the sound of the engine deepening into a full-throated roar, and a deep valley appeared between the peaks. "Sangong Pass!" he called above the roar of the engine. They swept into the pass, a brilliant red and gold leaf bright against the dark walls, and the frozen earth rose to meet them. Drummond gave the beaver full power and pulled the stick right into the pit of his stomach. Chung held his breath, waiting for the crash as they rushed to meet the skyline, wheels no more than 10 feet above the boulder-strewn ground, and then they were over the hump and flashing across a great cold glacier. Rolling steps, golden in the morning sun, stretched to the horizon, and Drummond grinned. "Now you know why I charge 2,000 a trip." Chung wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand and managed a weak smile. "I'm beginning to get the point. How much further?" 10 or 12 miles, that's all. Better get ready." The Chinese reached behind his seat for a submachine gun, cocked it and held it across his knees. As the beaver descended, he could see a narrow river brawling across a mass of tumbled boulders, widening into a shallow lake. 100 yards to the left, sheltered against a rock escarpment, was a ruined monastery, a scattering of houses at its feet. Drummond pointed to a wide sand flat at the far end of the lake. "That's where we land if we get the signal." "And if not?" "We get the hell out of here." He circled, coming in low across the lake, and Chung pointed excitedly. "There are people down there, standing in the shallows." "Women doing the washing," Drummond said, and swung in across the village, turning away from the escarpment and the fire-blackened ruins of the monastery. "What happened there?" Chung demanded. "It was a headquarters for local resistance back in 1950 when the Chinese Reds first invaded Tibet. There was a siege for a couple of days, but it didn't last long. They brought up a couple of field guns and blew the necessary holes through the walls." "Then what?" Drummond shrugged. "They saved everything worth having, then burnt the place to the ground and executed a couple of 100 monks." "To encourage the others?" Drummond nodded and took the beaver round to the other side of the lake in a graceful curve. "Not that it's done them much good. In areas like this, they only control the towns." He took the beaver down towards the village again, and Chung touched his arm quickly. "Is that the signal?" 3 flares, spaced out in a crude triangle, started to burn furiously, plumes of white smoke lifting into the cold air, and Drummond nodded. He throttled back, turned the beaver into the wind, dropped it neatly down on the firm, sandy shore of the lake, and taxied along to the far end. The women washing clothing in the shallows a few yards away moved up on the shore, their long woolen shubas tucked into their belts, and stood in a tight little group, watching the plane. Chung reached for the door handle and Drummond shook his head. "Not yet. We've got to be sure." At that moment, a horseman galloped over the crest of the slope above them and plunged down towards the plane. Drummond switched off the engine and grinned in the sudden silence. "There's our man." As he opened the door and jumped to the ground, the rider reined in his small Tibetan horse, dismounted and strode towards them. He was tall and muscular, with a deeply tanned face and high Mongolian cheekbones. He wore a long, wide-sleeved robe and sheepskin shuba, which left his chest bare, and knee-length boots of untanned hide. His hair was coiled into plaits, and he wore a sheepskin hat. His English